in this video, I want to explore the question, how do exchange networks, how do exchange networks, how do they do two things? How do they develop, and how does an exchange network expand? I want to explore these two questions, but before we explore them, we should get on the same page on exactly what we're talking about, and talk about what an exchange network is. And in its most fundamental form, an exchange network is just a group, maybe a group of villages, of people, of empires, even just a group of people that are trading, and they can trade many things. They might be trading goods. They might be trading bad things like diseases, and then they might even, and this is quite important, they might even be trading ideas and learning. You might be trading their learning, but with a solid understanding of what question we're actually asking. I think it could be fit to explore the two biggest historical examples of exchange networks from recent history. So to do that, let's scroll down to our map, and let's copy our question so that we can have it with us. Let's put it back here and get another one and put it down here with our map so that we have it. And let's try to answer this question. How do exchange networks develop and expand? And to answer this, we're going to be looking first at 1492, when Columbus sailed from here to here. And this is Columbus's famous journey. This is Columbus sailing here. Columbus. And when Columbus sailed, he sailed to the New World, and he found materials. He found, well, there was the myth that there would be mountains of gold, and there was a quantity of gold, and he also found silver, and there was much more silver that was taken back to Europe later, but there were raw materials. So immediately Columbus, he sent a letter back to the King of Spain, and everyone got quite excited. So Europeans started really sending and using many resources to try to claim the riches that the New World, this whole area down here, North America, South America, claim the riches that were to be had from this area. And it really was the potential. The Europeans thought, wow, there's this new land. There's the potential to get rich, and it's every man's dream to get rich quick. And it's really that get rich quick attitude that is how this exchange network between Europe and really we can call it Afro-Eurasia. And when I refer to Afro-Eurasia, I'm referring to the entirety of Europe, of Asia, and of Africa. I'm referring to those three continents because, for the most part, they're connected by land. They're connected here, and here by a short boat ride. So Afro-Eurasia really began trading with the Americas, and it was mainly Europeans in the Americas trading with Europeans in Europe. But you had these two world zones, as they're called, these two world zones that had been for all of human history, for the most part, before that, separate. You had these two world zones trading with each other and sending back and forth many resources. And the reason the Europeans wanted to trade, the reason they set up all this infrastructure to trade, was because of the potential that the Americas had, the natural resources like gold at first, and as time went on, silver exports, and of course in American history we have the slave trade and plantations and tobacco. There were furs. There were so many natural resources in the Americas that were sent back to Europe, and so we can guess maybe that exchange networks develop because of a potential. There's some kind of a potential of getting rich. And how would an exchange network expand? Well, exchange networks are really expanded once there is this realized potential. Once there's this potential, you have infrastructure set up, right? Europeans set up infrastructure so that they could go back and forth more cheaply. And if at first it costs $1,000 to ship back $2,000 worth of silver, you get $1,000 back. But if you can lower the shipping cost, if you can get your same $2,000 of silver for a shipping cost of $100, that's much better. And it means that the silver can be sold more cheaply to make the same profit back in Europe. And the reason I'm bringing this up, this economies of scale idea, you have infrastructure, things become more cheap, is because when a product becomes more cheap, more people buy it. There's the demand versus supply curve. As supply goes up, demand also, as the product becomes less expensive, the demand goes up inversely to that. So when more Europeans want a product, say silver, because it's getting cheaper, well, more infrastructure is created and more silver is sent back. And eventually, so much silver was sent back, just taking silver as an example, that the value went down. But the whole idea is that there's the potential that gets the initial infrastructure of the exchange network. And once the potential has been realized, there are infrastructure gains. There are real infrastructure gains that cause the exchange network to start to really expand. And I have a quote here. A quote, if we're reading the quote on the right here, by Anita Ravi, who is a big history project expert at the University of California, Berkeley. This is an example about the Brits and their tea, right? We now associate Britain with tea, so I'll read this quote here. And the quote says, "By 1700, transporters of tea such as the British East India Company had a monopoly on the tea trade from the East Indies. At the beginning of the 18th century, this company set up its East Asian office in the port city of Canton in China, which meant that the amount of tea in entering Great Britain increased dramatically, and as a result, prices dropped. As the price of tea fell, more people began to consume it because it was now more affordable." And that is the key, this final sentence. As the price of tea fell, more people began to consume it because it was now more affordable. And why did the price of tea fall? Because of this monopoly up here that the British East India Company had on tea, and because they set up this infrastructure in East Asia. This is why the price of tea fell, and this is why it became more affordable. And what happens when something becomes more affordable? More people buy it. And just as a second example here, of this potential and infrastructure relationship, let's think about the Silk Road, which was really the second big example of an exchange network. You had the Silk Road, which is this exchange network between Asia over here and Europe over there. And Well, what was traded in the Silk Road? Well, you had many expensive items. You had fine arts. You had pottery and cloths. You had many of these expensive things that Europeans were really quite interested in. All of the Asian products. And so let's look at what happened. At first, the Silk Road did not have much infrastructure. You could call it like a silk trail, and but there was this great potential. Europeans wanted what the Asians had, and because the Europeans wanted what the Asians had, they were willing to pay the Asians, give them things. This potential translated into a trading network that was connected, and once this trading network existed, there began to be infrastructure improvements. There began to be, for example, outpost cities that were set up along the way, so that traders only had to go little bits of the Silk Road at a time, and individually they could go small segments of it, and then the next trader could move it on. There were animals like the camel. The camel was a major animal because it had the hump which stores fat. It was adapted perfectly to the harsh environments in inner Asia. It could go for weeks on end without needing food. Go for a long time. And so you had camels, you had native peoples that could survive the harsh environments of inner Asia, that would take it from the Middle East. They would take it from the Middle East farther into Asia. You had these infrastructure advancements, and what happens when infrastructure is improved? Well, as we no doubt know by now, when infrastructure goes up, prices go down. There is this relationship between infrastructure and price. And because prices go down, demand goes up. When prices go down, demand goes up. And this is the ultimate relationship. And on the Silk Road, unfortunately, as we were talking about with what was spread in exchange networks, you did have your goods, but you did have your ideas and learning, but you also had diseases, and the Silk Road is a prime example of this. You had the Roman and the Chinese and the Asian empires that were trading, and everything was flourishing, but because of diseases traveling over this Silk Road with this infrastructure, you had diseases spreading. And I have a quote now from Craig Benjamin, who's a professor of history at Grand Valley State University, and what he said is, during the 3rd century CE, the Silk Roads fell into disuse as both the Chinese and Roman empires withdrew from the network. Silk Road's trade was at least partially responsible for this, because it led to the spread of disastrous epidemic diseases. Smallpox, measles, and bubonic plague devastated the populations at either end of the routes, where people had less resistance to each other's diseases. These huge demographic losses, which happened at the same time as the decline of previously stable civilizations, meant that the political situation in many parts of Afro-Eurasia was no longer conducive to large-scale commercial exchange. This incredible infrastructure and potential that developed the Silk Road, was now turning against it, and caused the collapse of the empires at either side that were once trading. So, in conclusion, we really, the answer to the question, how do exchange networks develop and expand, really rests upon these two factors: the potential for gain, that exists on either side, particularly the dominant side, in this case the Europeans for the Americas, and the potential in the Silk Road's case, for the Asians to make money, and for the Europeans to get products and goods. And once the potential is satisfied, exchange networks really blow up and expand when the infrastructure is improved. Because when the infrastructure is improved, the potential becomes even greater, which in turn improves the infrastructure. And this cycle continues. And hopefully this makes it clear how do exchange networks develop and expand through the lens of these historical examples.